Hey, what's up, guys? I thought I'd just like to talk a little bit about infrastructure in light of the Obama administration's plans to rebuild America, and in light of this really just unbelievably amazing book called Pattern Language. Um, Most of you won't know this about me, but infrastructure is one of my top sort of areas of research and interest. The first being design, the second being language, and the third being infrastructure. I think you can understand why I would be interested in this book. This book was published in 1977, and I think probably even 200 years from now it will still be way ahead of its time. I mean, this is just an incredible manual for not only building but of understanding the world. So this is my recommendation for what I think is probably one of the greatest books ever written. It's part of a 3-book series. It's the middle book in the triad. It's called A Pattern Language, and it's all about infrastructure and building, and it pretty much covers everything from the smallest scale to the largest scale, and the amount of information that is covered in this book is mind-blowing. I mean, this is one of those books where you could either go to college for like 4 years to learn this stuff, or you could just read this book. I mean, it is like a 4-year degree in holistic infrastructure. So there's just like sort of an introductory paragraph that I would like to read that I think sums up pretty much the essence of this book and the essence of holistic infrastructure as well. In short, no pattern is an isolated entity. Each pattern can exist in the world only to the extent that it is supported by other patterns. The larger patterns in which it is embedded, the patterns of the same size that surround it, and the smaller patterns which are embedded in it. This is a fundamental view of the world. It says that when you build a thing, you cannot merely build that thing in isolation, but must also repair the world around it and within it, so that the larger world at that one place becomes more coherent and more whole, and the thing which you make takes its place in the web of nature as you make it. So I think that really is a very poignant example of holistic thinking. Personally, if it were up to me, this would be required reading for anyone who had any kind of authority or control over infrastructure. Infrastructure is kind of a mix of two ideologies. On one hand, you have sort of the planning, and you might actually call that pure infrastructure. I mean, or infrastructure in its truest sense. And that is where you have, a lot of thinking and planning beforehand before anything is built. And then you have sort of the organic type of infrastructure that kind of comes later, or basically is built on top of that pure infrastructure. It kind of piggybacks. Say like you plan a town and you build a town and you have like nice neat rows of houses, perfect, each one is exactly identical, and that's sort of your pure or idealized infrastructure. And then people move into the town, and suddenly they have additional needs or desires that are not met by the initial infrastructure, and in which case they start building onto the existing infrastructure. It's not quite as stable as the initial model, but it fulfills needs that are not met by the foresight that comes with the initial planning stage. Of course, there are many problems associated with the second kind of infrastructure, but at the same time you can't really fulfill the needs of a community with sort of the pure infrastructure. So that's kind of what we have in the modern world, modern infrastructure. It's this amalgam of planning and sort of chaotic, resourceful additions that people then add and tack on to the original framework. The catch-22 with any kind of infrastructure, whether it's physical or social, is that while on the one hand it grants us a degree of stability and cohesion, on the other hand it prevents adaptation and progress in a lot of ways. Like, for example, if you analyze a modern city, you have these thoroughfares and you have these skyscrapers and various institutions that keep the city functioning. At the same time, the design of the matrix is basically locked in, because you can't just go in and pull out certain elements and expect the system to keep functioning. It'll collapse. So ultimately, what I think this indicates is that infrastructure really isn't designed to be static, or I should say that idealized infrastructure contains within it an inherent element of adaptability. Nothing is truly irreplaceable or static, and I would have to say that that is the main flaw in all contemporary infrastructure around the world. Humans have this tendency to build things, certain elements, to endure indefinitely, while in reality civilization is it has to progress, otherwise it will inevitably collapse. So I think that is kind of the ultimate challenge of infrastructure, and I would have to say that it's addressed pretty well in this book. I'm sure that most of you, at least those who live in America, are following the progress that the Obama administration is making on their program to renew and reinvest and rebuild America. A huge component of that, of course, is infrastructure. I mean, you might call that the old fallback of sort of Depression era sociopolitics. Whenever the economy gets bad, put people to work building new roads and retrofitting bridges and all that kind of stuff. But I think we're living kind of in a new world now where that sort of old thinking isn't really going to work anymore, because we've reached the edge of our sustainability matrix. There's kind of a rule of thumb that I like to keep in the back of my mind, and this is sort of like a biology related statement or truism. It basically just states that a static system is a dead system, and I guess the core kind of idea that is encapsulated in that statement is that systems evolve, and evolution or adaptation, just some sort of form of progressive movement from one point to another. It's pretty arbitrary, but without that sort of progression, you basically have a system that is just going to decay and eventually collapse.